Let's do a quick recap. On May 9th, Gavin Ortlund posted a video uh, giving an apologetic defense of Deuteronomy 21, 10 to 14, arguing that the text does protect females within ancient Israelite society or those that are acquired by Israelite soldiers through war. It protects them from sexual assault rather than allowing for the conditions of sexual assault or rape to occur. So that was his apologetic video on May 9th. I posted a video the same morning after watching his, a 20-minute response in which I argued the text did not do that. In fact, the text sets up females to be very much vulnerable to sexual assault. And by females, I mean women and also minors, what we would today consider minors, let's say 18 and younger or 17 and younger females. It sets them up to be in danger of sexual assault. And then I went through trying to get Gavin to respond because he'd already responded to my previous video, although I was very dissatisfied with his previous response because I think he avoided the central issue by arguing without evidence and, in fact, flatly contrary to evidence that Israelite civilians or civilians were always spared by the Israelite soldiers. Now, in fact, that is flatly contradicted by the text in multiple places, and ironically, even in Deuteronomy 21, which I'll come back to in a moment. So I had a previous track record with Gavin that was disappointing. But nonetheless, I thought it was really important for him to respond to my critique of his apologetic defense of Deuteronomy 21, not least because I think his apologetic defense of it is based on some very harmful assumptions about how one identifies sexual consent, which could make females in the church today vulnerable as well. So that was part of the background. Eventually, Gavin said he did watch the video, but he declined to have any further interaction with me or to raise any critique of my critique of him. So he refused to say where he thought my analysis was incorrect or wrong, even a single sentence, and just ended at that. And that was a few weeks ago. So a couple days ago, I posted a video explaining why I thought that was just a really inadequate response on his part and how, I mean, I frankly thought he was deflecting from addressing some hard and serious problems with the position that he had staked out in his May 9th video. So last night, Gavin responded to my video on YouTube with a comment, and that initiated a back and forth sequence. And I'm going to recount that now because I think it ends after he initially, again, I think deflects. It nonetheless ends with us getting what is to me the exact heart of the matter. And in getting to the heart of the matter, I believe Gavin's defense of Deuteronomy 21 by arguing that it does protect females from sexual assault or rape, it implodes. It just implodes. So we're going to begin by going over Deuteronomy 10 or 21, 10 to 14 to get it in people's minds as to what we're talking about exactly here. And then I'm going to recount the comments back and forth between Gavin and myself and draw some conclusions coming out of that. Okay, let's get centered, first of all, on the passage itself. Here it is, Deuteronomy 21, 10 to 14, marrying female captives. When you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman. Now, as I've noted here, that which is translated woman is Isha, just female. So it could be a person that we would consider to be a legal adult today. It could be a 15 or 16-year-old virgin girl. Indeed, it's much more likely that it's going to be a 15 or 16-year-old virgin girl than a 30 or 40-year-old woman who's been married for years and raised children. Is more likely to be a 15, 16-year-old. So keep that in mind. Okay, you see among the captives a beautiful Isha, female, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and pare her nails. And she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house, and lament her father and mother a full month. Now, the next thing to note here, I said a moment ago that right in Deuteronomy 21, you have the implication that civilians are being killed by the Israelite soldiers. And here it is. Why? Now, set aside the father, but just look at the mother. Why is she mourning her mother? Well, first of all, she's being captured. She's being kidnapped. We call that today kidnapped. And if she's mourning her mother, there's a good implication here that her mother's been killed. Right? So she's mourning the loss of her mother. He's been captured, she's been taken away. Whether she's been kidnapped and her mother's still alive, or potentially her mother is dead, certainly civilians are being directly impacted by the armies. So it is possible, as I noted, that you have a 15, 16-year-old virgin girl who's been seized from her parents, her family's been killed, and she's now been taken by the Israelite soldiers, and one of them finds her attractive. Continuing on. After that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife after a month. But if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. But you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. Okay, so yes, many critics rightly point out that this legislation would be equivalent to or set up very much the danger of females being sexually assaulted because they are not consenting to this. Okay, so um, so here's how uh, Gavin responds initially. He says, Randall, I'm just seeing this. Now, this, again, is reference to the video I posted a couple days ago, pointing out how he declined to have any further interaction. He says, I'm just seeing this. I'm sorry I gave offense by declining your offer of a dialogue. I didn't expect it would be as big a deal to you as it evidently is. Now, I'm going to pause here. Uh, to me, that's casting shade. That's what we call casting shade. Okay. Uh, it's not a big deal. I think it is worth people noting that Gavin just deflects when he has hard questions. That's all this is about. It's not about me. Continuing on, he says, I get flooded with interview and dialogue requests enough to decline most of them. I find to do dialogues well, it takes a real commitment of time and energy. I just returned from out of the country and am already inundated. I'm trying to hit deadlines of research for videos on the cosmological and teleological arguments that I hope to publish by mid-July. And in our previous interaction via comments, okay, now he's going to shift now. So I just want to say here he's saying he's busy. Fair enough, I'm busy too. No problem. As I noted in my video, the issue is not that he's busy. The issue is that he's just flatly declined to have any further interaction, even giving a single sentence on Twitter as to why he thought my analysis was flawed. He said he watched the 20 minutes, but declined to give any critical feedback to what I had written, only saying, I've watched it, but I don't want to have a dialogue. End of story, period. And that's really the problem. Now, had he said, here's a single sentence as to why I think your analysis is flawed, oh, okay, we can go there. I can work with that. Or if he had said, hey, I would like to have a dialogue, but I'm busy. Let's do it in October. Could have worked with that. Um, but the thing is, he watched the video, but then refused to say anything at all. And that was the issue. Okay, and then he shifts gears. He says, also in our previous interaction via comments, I did not have the impression you were being accurate in describing the views you were criticizing, and some of your critiques of other apologists strike me as unfair. But he gives no examples of where I've been unfair. And frankly, I think he's been inaccurate. So, but what I do is I put down and explain details as to what the concerns are. He concludes, from perusing the comments, I noticed I was not alone in that. Even here, saying that I told you to go away and putting out multiple videos speculating on why I'm not interested in the dialogue is kind of odd. There's no big story here. I am honestly just not that interested, Abel, right now. I wish you well, and perhaps another time we could interact. Okay. The thing here to note is he's written out 202 words. It doesn't take long to count the words, right? Just highlight them and do a word count. 202 words he's written, and yet not a single word is devoted to saying where he believes the video I posted is in error in critiquing his video defending Deuteronomy 21. And that's the issue. Deuteronomy 21. He's completely, repeatedly deflecting from that in various different ways, making veiled kind of criticisms of me that are personal in nature, talking about how he's busy, saying without specific details or examples that he thinks I'm not accurate in interacting with the views of others, but gives no specific examples of where I'm flawed in terms of Deuteronomy 21 and his analysis there. So I respond. I said, you said you did not have the impression I was being accurate in describing the views I was criticizing, and that some of my critiques of other apologists strike you as unfair. Yet you provide no specific examples where I have misrepresented specific views either of you or anyone else. Instead, choosing to take issue with the fact that I refer to your cursory declination as go away in the video title. Um, Most revealing, though, you took the time to type 202 words. Not one of them addressed my critique of your video of Deuteronomy 21. Your comments are one big deflection. I get this response a lot from apologists. It's very disappointing to me. This is where professional apologists, in my experience, really diverge from Christian academics, philosophers, theologians, and so on, because the latter are seem to me much more open generally to taking in critical dialogue and analysis and revising their views. The apologists, professional apologists who make their living instilling confidence in a Christian constituency, seem much more guarded about having this kind of vulnerable interaction. Gavin then responded, if you want specific examples, see the 5 points I listed in my first response to you, especially 1, 3, and 5. Correct. My comment here was not about Deuteronomy 21, but addressing your claim in this video that I told you to go away. I can see we won't make progress, so I will sign off. God bless. Okay. Now he said my first response to you. The first response is in regard to his defense of the Deuteronomic narrative against the claim that civilians were ever harmed by the Israelite soldiers. I don't want to revisit that here because to me that is a red herring. We're now talking about Deuteronomy 21. I believe in our previous exchange, I showed why Gavin's view there fails because, like Paul Copan, he just sort of stipulates without any good evidence that no civilians were ever harmed by the Israelite soldiers, even though there are multiple instances of texts that describe Israelite soldiers harming civilians. But I don't want to revisit that here. Right here, we're talking about Deuteronomy 21, and Gavin is continuing to deflect. So I said, look, we can make progress if you would provide detailed responses to the criticisms instead of repeatedly deflecting. Let's start here. You think a 15-year-old female who experienced the trauma of her family being killed can freely consent to marriage and sexual contact with a soldier who killed her family if she is given 30 days to mourn. Please address specifics, Gavin. So I'm saying this is an implication of his view that a 15-year-old female, because she'd been given 30 days to mourn, which he makes a big deal about, that this is sufficient to say she is now freely consenting when she agrees to marry the soldier who finds her attractive and wants to marry her. Gavin then replies, and this is the key. He says, no, such a person is not in a position to consent. Unfortunately, consent as we understand it was not really a thing in the ancient world. I don't know why you would ask me this, as I never said such a person could consent or that it is okay. Like I said, the criticisms that you offer don't seem to exhibit a good understanding of my perspective. My argument was that this law reflects an improvement on and protest against the conventional ancient practice, not an ideal. Now, the thing is, in this response, Gavin has lost the argument, as I see it. The first thing he says is, look, he says here now, well, my argument wasn't that this is law of great, but that it's an improvement on ancient practice. Because all things being equal, being given 30 days to mourn is better than being given no time at all to mourn. That's his argument here. Okay. That argument completely fails. It gives up the central issue. Remember what the central issue of his video was. His video of May 9th was arguing that Deuteronomy 21 really protects females from sexual assault or rape because it allows for them to have consent and time to mourn and then make a decision to marry the soldier who finds them attractive and is now attempting to initiate marriage, betrothal, and marriage with the individual. And so that was Gavin's argument. And in my initial critique of Gavin, it was either in that critique or in the one I'd already made in his earlier video. I made the following point. I said, look, all things being equal, you could argue that a person who is sexually assaulted, when they are completely passed out, that is less traumatizing than a person who is sexually assaulted at gunpoint or knife point. That's fair. So it's quote unquote an improvement if they're assaulted because they were given a date rape drug rather than because they were held down knife point. That's less traumatizing, all things being equal, but it's still sexual assault. It's not it's not good because it's less harmful and intrusive, all things being equal. And what Gavin is now, his view is saying, well, look, I'm just saying it's a little better to have 30 days to mourn. Um, that's better than what other ancient Near Eastern peoples were doing. That doesn't mean it's not sexual assault, though. This is the issue. The point is, as he now concedes clearly, that a 15, 16, 17-year-old who was kidnapped, may potentially had her family killed, and will never see them again, and now has been taken off to a foreign land by the Israelites, and is now asked by this 28 or 30-year-old Israelite soldier who wants to marry this 15 or 16-year-old. She said, will you consent to marry him? Gavin now concedes he doesn't have the ability to freely consent. What this means is that this would meet a legal definition today of sexual assault. As I noted in my video earlier, for example, in the Criminal Code of Canada, which I'm familiar with on this issue, um, in order for there to be sexual consent, you have to be able to consent. Your consent has to be enthusiastic. It can't just be like, okay, you actually have to be expressing enthusiastic consent, and it has to be ongoing, continual consent, enthusiastic throughout a sexual encounter. And if you don't have those three things, the ability to consent, enthusiastic, and ongoing, then the sexual contact could meet the legal definition of a sexual assault. And so now if you have a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl being caught by the Israelite army and her family was killed, she's been kidnapped, and she's now told you have 30 days to mourn. Will she have the ability to sexually consent after the 30 days? No, she will not. Gavin concedes this, in which case the sexual contact that will result between her and the soldier, even if it occurs in a conjugal relationship recognized in ancient Israelite society, would still meet the legal definition of sexual assault, which means that his whole apologetic collapses on Deuteronomy 21. Now, the last thing to note here is that so Gavin says, quoting him again from that passage, unfortunately, consent as we understand it was not really a thing in the ancient world. I don't know why you would ask me this, he goes on, as I never said such a person could consent or that it is okay. So now he's conceding that consent to protect females from sexual assault wasn't even on the radar of the Torah of Deuteronomy 21. That Deuteronomy 21 wasn't even concerned with consent and the possibility that the absence of consent in the female could result in the rape of that female. That's the issue. That's what he's supposed to be protecting as an apologist, Deuteronomy 21, from the critics who say precisely that Deuteronomy 21 does not protect females from sexual assault, but rather allows for their sexual assault. So Gavin has ultimately backed himself into the corner of saying the only thing he's saying at this point is, okay, it may allow for sexual assault, but it's still, all things being equal, better than some of the other options in the ancient Near Eastern world. And that's a pretty bad apologetic, I have to say. So I can understand perhaps why Gavin was repeatedly deflecting from addressing these very direct questions and criticisms of his defense of Deuteronomy 21, because ultimately he had no defense. And that's my conclusion. Now I'm going to wrap this up by just simply saying one more thing. What texts like this should do is we should not retreat to what I think is just bad and disingenuous apologetics like Gavin is giving us about his Deuteronomy 21, where he's, I think, shifting goalposts and he's using red herrings and he's trying to obscure issues and ultimately not defending the text in the way he is purporting to against sexual assault. Rather than engage with apologetics like that, recognize the limitations of the text, bring a moral critique to the text, recognizing that from a Christian perspective, I mean, God allows it there for a reason, but that doesn't mean that you adopt disingenuous defenses of it in order to maintain an understanding of its moral acceptability. It's not a morally acceptable text, even if it is an improvement on other ancient Near Eastern understandings. You should be able to bring that kind of critique as a Christian, because having a particular interpretation of Deuteronomy 21 is not part of the Apostles' Creed. It's not part of the Nicene Creed. Um, A Christian or a Jew today, or a Muslim, who gives some degree of authority to Deuteronomy 21 can nonetheless bring a moral critique to the text without having their faith imperiled. And that is far better than having this kind of substandard apologetic and then deflecting from critics when they attempt to call you out on your substandard apologetic.